Now, that was a while back now. For people who might not have heard that interview or seen that interview, remind us what your name is again. It's the V stands for what?
V stands for nothing. I was a there was an influx of filmmaker directors just before the Second World War that
Yeah,
decided they would add Von into their name to make them
yeah,
sound a little better. So I thought that was a pretty good thing to add to my name because there was already a guitarist for Prince's band. It was called Jesse Johnson. So
yeah.
really nothing terribly exciting.
Oh, it is exciting. I knew that story, but I just wanted to be reminded. That's all.
I didn't have the balls to go Jesse Von Johnson. I should have done that.
Yeah, maybe. I do the Shane A. Bassett, but I do have a middle name, so that's all good. Uh, we're talking about Boudica today. This is a movie that obviously you've taken on a lot to do this film. It's probably one of the biggest movies you've done in scope. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, most ambitious for sure.
Yeah. Based on actual events, AD 60. So you're going right back. Did you do a lot of research? I'm guessing maybe you did because there was
A
the,
ton of
the
research.
limited budget you might have had. There's some really great detail in it.
I read so many books on this, you have no idea. My daughter's middle name is Boudica. She was born 16 years ago, so it gives you a little idea of how long this one has been gestating.
Wow.
Story I absolutely love. My mum took me to see the Thornycroft statue when I was a little boy, which is outside the Houses of Parliament. It's the most wonderful statue of Boudica and her two daughters. It's at the end of the movie if you made it that far.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course I did.
it's a very emotional sort of story, and my mum particularly identified with the story being a sort of powerful red-headed single parent. To her, Boudica meant something sort of rather profound, and that stuck with me. And the more I dug away at the story, the more I felt there was a incredible movie there that had to be made. The problem was this middle act, this reason for the revenge, and trying to make that cinematic. I don't know if you know anything about the history of it, and as you quite rightly pointed out, it's based on fact. Two sources of fact. The first is Tacitus, who wrote about 50 years after the events happened, and then Cassius Dio, who wrote during the events. He actually saw what was going on. He saw Boudica on her chariot with her hair, screaming and yelling at the troops, and she apparently heard her voice, or at least heard from Romans, soldiers, what her voice sounded like. And so we have that little tidbit of information. The Celts kept nothing. They didn't keep a written history. That's why we have the Dark Ages when the Romans went away. It wasn't that we went dark. There was simply no written history from the time
Yeah.
that was not. So we have these two, a paragraph here and a paragraph there, but we know of it as close to first-hand information as there is, which, as I'm sure you understand in historical terms, is it's like gold. And so you start with that, and then you gradually build away from that, knowing what we know about Rome. But I learned an awful lot about that period on this film, and strangely enough, we ended up filming 20 miles from Colchester. Colchester is the modern name for Cullodenham, which was the place where the temple of Claudius was. So
Yeah.
she burned. She razed it to the ground, and to this day, there's a dark layer of burned sand. Glass, glazed sand from the inferno that she caused, leveling
Amazing.
the town, which would have been a town full of Roman colonists, their families and children and dogs, and she killed everyone. And every so often they dig some more things up when they're doing roadworks there, and they have a museum in Colchester Castle. So it was and that was very close to where we were filming. So it felt like I had her watching me on my shoulder the whole time. I was quite a different feeling to making an action movie, to know that you had that responsibility. So I hope people will enjoy it, but I hope they also take a little bit away from it, about the character and who she was and what she deserves.
I can't see why people wouldn't enjoy it, especially lovers of this genre. But how did you fit it all in like 94 minutes? There must have been a lot more that you
It's
wanted to
tough,
put in.
yeah. I mean, I think there's a wonderful 3 hour movie.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah,
lot of battling going on. Producers now have to release a film of 90 minutes. That's the given length.
yeah, I get it.
There was a longer movie. It would have, but it's difficult. You're in a world where there are compromises, and as a filmmaker, your decision is which compromises do you settle with, and which ones do you dig your heels in and say no, I won't. And if there's too many where you're saying no, I won't, they eventually get rid of you as the director. So you, you choose your battles, and the running time of the movie was one that they decided to pitch their heels in on. You know, I got Olga, I got my wonderful cast from Vikings, I got to make the script that I'd written.
Yeah.
I got to film not in Santa Clarita, I got to go to England and
Yeah.
film where she had galloped in her chariot 2,000 years ago and cauterized, you know, and killed Romans. So I got an awful lot, and so it was okay for me to have to settle on a few things. But yes, it was an awful lot of story, you know.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, it's a step up for you as a director. And I'm not saying that in a bad way at all, but you achieved a lot from probably what was a moderate budget. I mean, you did very well. Was it a challenge with the location? Because most of your scenes were outdoors, I'm assuming. There wasn't a lot inside.
Thank you very much. It was yeah. I do feel I achieved a lot for a small budget. It was a step up for me in terms of I got to
Yeah.
make a story about a female character who doesn't
Yep.
do martial arts. You know, along with Hell Hath No Fury, which is another female-driven picture that I made during COVID. This,
You
for me,
did.
these represent a traverse, you know, an elevation into storytelling, which hopefully is more popular and has a more, you know, more sort of universal sort of appeal than, you know. And I love martial arts and I love action, but it's a very set audience that likes those pictures. You know, even if you put a lot of humor in and try
Yeah.
and put big names in them, you know, it's you know, I'm trying to make films that are of the caliber that the ones that made me want to make films when I was a little fella, you know, Ford and Hawks and all those
Oh,
wonderful
of
pictures.
course. Yeah.
And so, you know, being allowed to make Boudica was a wonderful step in that direction. It was extraordinarily challenging working in the UK, where you'll have sun, you know, at lunchtime and snow in the afternoon, and then it'll be windy as the sun goes down, and you've got a completely, you know, different season all in 24 hours. So you're battling that. We had the movie gods behind us a lot on this one. We shot in Ipswich, which is in this wonderful little gully that traverses England of warm air. So in the rest of England, it's pouring rain and they're miserable. We were actually quite sunny there, which was sort of rather fun. Completely by mishap. It wasn't by design at all. And then with regard to making, you know, 20 extras look like 1,000, it's, you know, there's certain scientific things you can do with where you point the camera, making
Oh, yeah.
sure that you keep them all on screen. And then you have to, you know, additionally add to that with digitally, and you do your best to try and keep that as not digital as possible, you know.
Well, I think the digital aspect was fairly limited. Am I correct? Because
Yeah,
those
yeah,
torches look like real fire. You had real
yeah,
horses. I know some of the long shots were probably digital, but
yeah.
again, you achieved a lot
Oh,
in practical.
it's always been my dream to do things practically, and it's not from some kind of strange Luddite, you know,
Yeah,
inability to accept the future, but it's more to do with getting performance. You know, if you have an actor who's firing a gun or getting shot or hit by an arrow, you know, the closer you can get to making them feel that, the more convincing their facial expression is going to be, and the audience is watching the actor's facial expression. They're watching to, you know, to
oh
be
yeah,
told how to feel. You know, and so you have a bunch of guys running around with rubber guns and fake flashes, for example. It looks that way. The audience comes away feeling that. But in this case, we gave, you know, we had real swords. We had sparks hitting when the swords were hitting. We had arrows that were cleaving people, and real blood was being, you know, not real blood. It was theatrical
I
blood.
get it.
But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, I struggled very hard to give a practical veneer to this, as opposed to something that was, you know, done and then we added the blood or we added this later. And it always feels that way. And I feel the actors, you know, for example, when she kills Nick Moran, she slices him across the belly and his intestines fall out. You do that, and not only Olga, but the rest of the cast and the soldiers behind her see that, and they react, and their faces are
It's
realistic.
a real
You know,
reaction. That's it.
no, they know it's fake, but the fact is they're able to react to something. Whereas if you say pretend to do this, we're going to do it in post later, you get a kind of bland expression, and they do their best, but it's either too big or too small. But when you do it, and you hear the slop and the slush of an intestine, albeit made of latex, landing on the floor, they are able to react in a way that the audience doesn't need to
Mm.
see the effect anymore, because they're reading the actors' faces and they go, "Oh my God," you know, and they put their hand to their mouth, and you haven't actually shown very much in terms of the actual guts, but the audience has been affected. And this is proper filmmaking. This is sort of the magic of cinema, I think, you know, to allow,
yeah.
you know,
Well, you've come a long way since Alien Agent, that is for sure. I have a
I love
feeling.
working with Mark Dacascos on that, by the way. I truly enjoyed working with it. It's the first time I
Oh
really.
yeah, I'm not knocking it. Billy Zane too. It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite movies of yours.
It was a tough bloody film to make, that one. That was one where, you know, you arrive and they say, you're not allowed to touch the script. We trust you as a stunty and an actor director, but you can't do anything. It's sacrosanct. And I knew there were things that weren't working, and I tried to sort of change them a little bit. And I had a guy behind me saying, stick to what's written. It was run very much like a TV show, and I was, you know, it was okay for me at the time, and I think it was a learning experience. So that when you came to something like Boudica, at this point in my career, 10, 15 years later, and see something's not working on the page, and you're watching it on the monitor, and you realize this needs to be fixed, and you get with the actors and you say, look, we all feel this isn't working, it's not feeling organic, and you come up with something, and the actors are wonderful, good ones, and suddenly what comes out of that is the most organic solution, and it feels real, and the audience watches it and goes, God, that's some beautiful writing that happened there, that script was wonderful. They have no idea that that was absolutely not what was written. What was written didn't work. But it doesn't matter. You know, at the end of the day, what we want is to give the audience this beautiful, you know, this beautiful experience. And yeah, Alien Agent was a learning curve, but hopefully the few fruits of that labor will be experienced by watching Boudica.
Well, thank you. I was not expecting that much info about Alien Agent, because that is one of my favorites of yours. I've got a few. Hell Hath No Fury is another one. I want to talk about Nina, but I'll get to that at the end. But Olga, we've mentioned Olga's name a few times, and I'll ask you a little bit more about her, working with her. But you've worked with her before, former Bond girl. She took on a lot, and I think that scene at the start where the calm before the storm, before she became this beautiful princess and battle woman. I mean, yeah, she really showed a lot of range and physicality. So great choice in the lead of Boudicca. And I'm assuming you had her in mind. You've had the movie in mind for such a long time.
100%. This film was gestating, and it wasn't until I'd worked with Olga on White Elephant and impressed me an immense amount. She came off a plane. She'd been traveling for something along the lines of 22 or 23 hours. She hadn't slept. And she looked at me and said, this is a really busy day we've got. It's like, this is going to be like a 12-hour day. I said, yeah, I mean, you know, it's an indie movie. And she said, all right, have someone get me the strongest coffee you've got. Maybe get me 2 or 3 cups of that. Have someone else get this ready. Get something, you know, get the stunt coordinator over here to tell me what he expects me to do and show me how to do it safely. And let's go. And I looked at her and I thought, I've never had an actor say that to me before in that way. And so we got her coffee, we got the stunt coordinator with her, and we shot that day for 12 hours. And I said, you got to go sleep now. She said, absolutely. And it was, you know, and this is the kind of mindset that I love working with. It's a pragmatic, okay, there's no complaining. It's like, this is what we've got. I've agreed to it. I'm making a lot of money. Let's see how we can do it, you know. And this I really love. And we work through the dialogue and we make it work. On this one, I didn't know if she was going to be interested in doing it. It was a hell of a challenge. So I knew she was in Paris. I said, I'm going to come out. I've got an idea I want to pitch to you. I don't want to tell it to you over the telephone. I'm going to fly to you and I'll meet you at your hotel. And we'll
you went to Paris, especially. Now that's huge. She would have appreciated that.
Paris, which is no small thing, to jump on a plane and fly yourself to Paris from LA. Anyway, this is what you do. This is what, and you hope that they understand that, the commitment. So straight away, that's showing them how much you want them in the film. I painted a picture of her as the princess first, with the beautiful hair and the makeup and the wonderful flowing cloak, and she has her skin done by the best everything's like Beverly Hills wife would today. It's amazing how similar 2,000 years ago the Roman wives in England were looking after themselves, imported nail varnish, imported perfume, and the lips.
Absolutely gorgeous, and my type of girl.
And then I painted a picture of what she looks like afterwards, with no eyebrows, with the scar, false teeth, with the hair wild and pallid skin. And I painted those two, and I said, look, this is what's exciting for me. This is how you start the film, and this is how you end the film. And so it shows your range as an actor and what you can do. And everyone knows you from the Bond films, but this is a way to show this. You're almost playing 2 different people in one film. And actors like that sort of thing, and she liked it. And she signed on. And she said, "That's great, let's do it." She was worried initially. She said, "Look, the English are going to hate me. I'm Ukrainian. Why am I playing in English? This famous screen." And to which I answered, the Celts were not English. The Celts, were closer to Eastern European
Good
than they are to
answer.
the English that we. The language they speak, the Celts and the Gaels, that can Gaelic, came from Eastern Europe. They didn't come from any that we know of Anglo-Saxon ideas we have. They were not united. There were multiple bands of tribes all over England.
Yeah.
Boudica was the first person, the first warrior leader to bring them all together, to unify them. So there was, she was Britain. The language that she speaks in Ukraine is probably closer to what the Celts spoke than the English that we know now.
Likely, yeah.
That was the one thing. The other thing is I desperately didn't want to make the historical English film with a bunch of Shakespearean sounding actors. I don't mind Shakespearean actors, but I didn't want that particular vernacular, well-spoken. They've spent their life in a grammar school kind of, because it's just not common people sound like. It's this misconception we have that that's how they spoke in Shakespearean times. They didn't. They were rough and tumble, Darwinian, survival of the fittest. It was they were tough, and so that was the other reason I wanted a Ukrainian in there. I didn't want to go, or a foreigner. I didn't mind that. I wanted to lean into that roughness,
Yeah, there's one particular scene where she drops to the ground and it's intercutting with the battle scene, and then we realizing what's happened and she realizing what happened. There's no sound or speaking from her. You've just got the music in the background while the battle's continuing, and it's intercut really well.
The murder of her husband. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Leo Gregory tells her the story. We had it all. We had her scream. We had Leo's story. We had the sound of the battle. It was all built.
How it played out was better, I think.
Yeah, I watched it and I finally said, I don't think we need the sound. I think we take it out. It was like one of those moments. I don't know if you've seen a film of mine called Avengement. We have a huge fight scene at the end, and we had a score on that. It was like, it just doesn't sound right. So I took the score off, and you play it for the sound of the fighting and the breathing and the gasping and the swearing and the cussing, and that becomes your soundtrack. And I think there's moments in time where it's better to leave the audience to make up their own mind as opposed to hand feeding them,
Well, thank you. That worked. I mean, are you going to keep going with your career on a bigger and bigger in scope each picture? Do you think
That's the idea.
Yeah.
That's the idea. Yeah, I just did a film with Aaron Eckhart. It's a film about spies, lots of throwbacks to the Cold War era. It's set present day, and that comes out next, called Chief of Station. And I really enjoyed working with him and Alex Pettifer. And my plan is to go do another picture with Aaron and raise the budget levels and raise the awareness of my work as much as possible. And hopefully I get to talk with you about that one soon.
Yeah, well, I like Aaron. I think Aaron Eckhart's a great actor. What about working with, I've got to ask you this, Bruce Willis isn't very well at the moment, but you did work with him on White Elephant, with Olga and John Malkovich, of course. How was your experience with Bruce?
It was heartbreaking and tragic and very, very sad.
So you kind of knew what was going on as a director, obviously.
I didn't until sort of the last minute,
Okay.
I was not aware of the scope of where he was. And when, he came into the lobby and shook everyone's hands and looked okay and looked, and then sort of a bit glassy eyed and then went away. And it was like, that was when I really realized, okay, this is going to be a little trickier than I'd expected. And I'm an enormous fan of Bruce Willis. All of the guys on my team
Personally, yeah, me too. I grew up watching him.
Michael Rooker, who was the lead in that film, who's a dear friend. We looked at each other and we're like, A, is this the right thing for us to be doing morally? And B, how are we going to make it work in the scope of this film that we've all agreed to and we've all got money for and we've been shooting for a week, So it was a very complex moment for us, and we lent into it. We figured out the best way to deal with it. Michael would talk with him and coach him into it. We'd get that performance. He had his lines being fed to him through an earpiece.
Sure.
It was, you could see moments of clarity where he was there in the moment and smiling and, maybe a sentence or two. And then it flicked to, he'd forgotten where,
He went blank. Yeah.
So it was heartbreaking. I had him for 2 half days. We had the first half day, you shoot till 1 o'clock, and then he's done after that. It was, they told me he doesn't want to work any,
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
that much out of him because it takes such an amount of him to sort of be there and be in that moment. And then when it's gone, he just doesn't want to do it anymore. You can't go to lunch and then expect to come back from lunch. It doesn't work the same ways.
Yeah.
And so I had the first day, and at the end of that, we got what we needed shot. It was in the movie. And then the second day we did the same thing, and that was all we had, and we worked that through the whole film, and then everything else was shot over the shoulder of his wonderful stand-in, lovely human being who's worked with him for years and years and looks just like him, has a similar bone structure and similar haircut, and
Yes.
it even the lines so that we could see the face moving and then put the voice on.
Yes.
So I only worked with them for literally, 2 half days, which was 6 hours,
Yeah.
and worked that through the movie. The overall feeling was very, very melancholy, very sad for all of us to see.
And the other actors would have been compensating for that, obviously.
Yeah, they did their best, but it's very tricky. But also, it reminds you of your own temporary, sanity in this world, and it causes a lot of self reflection as to what am I doing? Why am I making a film with someone who's clearly on the road, a lot further down the road to needing permanent care than pitched to me. So it was an awkward scenario. It was beautiful to see him through the lens, and there was a couple of moments where we joked, and it was him there, and it was him briefly, and those were precious and wonderful.
Yeah.
But I think what he's doing now and relaxing where he is great. The big thing I felt through all of it was the incredible bravery and fortitude of him agreeing to do it at all. And the reason being that he's wanting to put money aside for the family, which is almost the kind of thing that makes you want to well up and cry inside when you think of it. It's like this last hurrah and get out there and do as much as he possibly can before the inevitable happens, which is, we fade to black, the curtain drops. So I felt great admiration for him through it all, and only love. And I'm as melancholy an experience as it was, I'm very pleased that it happened the way it did, and he was in the movie, and most importantly that I got to meet Olga and forge that relationship that allowed me to go and bug her on her holiday with her fiance while she was in Paris, and bring her into Boudica. And I can't imagine anyone else doing as good a job as she did. She was wonderful, and it truly was a pitched battle. We're up to our knees in the blood and the mud and the beer.
Yeah.
No beer, blood and mud, and horse shit and swords and stuntmen, and it was a lot to ask of a person, and she did great. So White Elephant was wonderful because of that introduction, if nothing else.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for sharing that story. He means a lot to me as an actor and a performer. So thanks for sharing that.
I've ever talked about it, by the way. I've absolutely turned everyone else down dead when they ask about that, but I think the time is past enough, and you did it, in a way that was respectful. And I think it's,
well, thanks, Jesse. I respect you, and as I said, I'm a fan of your work, and I appreciate that. But before we wrap up, I've got to mention Nina Bergman from Hell Hath No Fury. I actually thought she'd pop up in Boudica. Well, you couldn't get her for a cameo?
I love Nina, and I loved working with her. I have enormous respect for her.
Great film.
At one point, Boudica we had talked about perhaps having Nina in it, and so I didn't feel right. And Lucy Martin played the Carthamanda character.
Yes.
And Nina quite rightly felt that was okay if I went off and did that on my own. And so what I did do is I called Nina to come out and work on Chief of Station. So she flew out to Budapest, and we worked with Aaron Eckhart. She has a great scene with Aaron Eckhart.
Good.
That movie. I'm still a huge fan of hers.
Yes.
She has become, she's in a relationship with one of my dear friends, Daniel Bernhardt, who was also in Chief of Station and was in Hell Hath No Fury, and who's someone I love working with. So I'm no doubt, if I'm lucky enough, we'll be working with the two of them in the future.
Well, she's got a new movie coming out in the UK very soon. I'll be watching that, and I'm going to work on hopefully having an interview with her, because I do report in the US and the UK as well as Australia. So I'm working on talking to Nina. She's pretty fantastic.
She did great in Hell Hath No Fury, and that was, I realized I really enjoyed working with a female lead. There's a different dynamic to working with a male lead, where there's inevitably a small amount of competition. There's inevitably a small amount of
Yeah.
of masculine testosterone measuring going on.
Exactly.
I don't mind. I was a stuntman for 20 years. I'm fine with all
Oh,
that type of
sure, yeah.
stuff. I'll roll that way as well. But there's something to be said for a female lead where it becomes purely about the pragmatics of making as good a picture as possible. They have their own, idiosyncrasies that you deal with in a slightly different way. But for me, I enjoy it immensely. I enjoyed working on Boudica, and I really, really enjoyed working on Hell Hath No Fury. These were characters and films that I felt I did a as good a job as I've ever done, and it was good. So I don't know if I have any others lined up. There are characters as Odette from the Second World War,
Oh, yeah.
that I want to do, and there's that actually worked with the OSS, and
Yeah.
there's many
I
stories.
know of that character, yeah.
Yeah.
That person.
A few that I have. I think they've actually done a big budget film at least once of it already, but it's you learn about different things that really make you tick, and the Boudica story appealed to me immensely. It really did, and I like her character. And when I figured out how to make the story with the daughters work in a way that I could handle it as a director,
the balance was really well done, and I think people appreciating the drama as well as the action will notice that.
Good. I'm so pleased you said that. There are certain things that I feel are unfilmable and you shouldn't film, violent acts. And it was Tacitus who recorded exactly what happened to the daughters. There's no need to talk about it here. If anyone wants to do their research, they can.
Yeah.
But needless to say, it was far more violent and atrocious than anything that you would want to film. It doesn't. That sort of thing doesn't make sense. It's better. You don't. You are asking an audience to enjoy 2 hours of their time and invest in characters. You're not there to make a documentary to shock them or splatter porn or this kind of stuff. So it was a challenge how to represent that in a way that did the story justice, but didn't turn off the audience. And so when that came to me, the method that we use for it in Boudica, I knew I had the basis of a film. And from that point, the script came very, very quickly, and it was done, and within a few months I was off with Olga. But it had taken 15 or 16 years to get to that, which is so embarrassing to admit, but that's
not embarrassing. Keep doing what you're doing, Jesse. I'm impressed, and I think I want to see this 3-hour version of Boudica one day, which we'll probably never get to see. However, and to wrap it up, in your final words, why should Aussie audiences choose to watch Boudica? And anyone watching around the world, actually, why should people choose to watch this movie? I can recommend it, but from the director's mouth.
Boudica is a story about a woman who brought together a group of people to fight back against an oppressive colonist, force.
Against all odds.
Yeah, much like the basis of America, much like what Ukraine is going through now, much like many, many things that have happened, especially in Australia. You can understand, the effect of a colony, trying to enforce its laws, its taxes, and its greed upon a smaller nation. And she was the first real historical character to say no, enough is enough, and put a foot down and bring a whole bunch of people together who had never in the past fought together as one, and pit them against the Roman Empire, which at the time represented, the only force in the world.
Yeah, the huge conglomerate that was the Roman Empire that just took over everything. So
I think that's an ageless story. I think that's something. And then on top of that, you have the personal, side of her story, which is very, very compelling.
Yeah.
Normal, and the amount of similarities, that a middle class Beverly Hills housewife, here in my town would have with a middle class housewife in Rome at the time is unbelievable. You could literally take that woman from the streets of Londinium 2,000 years ago, and put her in Beverly Hills, and not one person would pay a second glance to her as she walked past them. The hair is so similar, the makeup is so similar, the earrings, the clothing, the shoes are so similar. It's unbelievable, and there's not many other places in history that you can make that similarity. And so I find it sort of uncanny how similar things were, and how it works into today's. Even the strangeness in the society that they had, the sort of battling